evening. Today is Thursday, July 10th, and I'm at the Brooklyn Public Library, Kings Bay Library, and I'm here to record a story for Brooklyn Public Library, Our Streets, Our Cities. We have Gail and Howard Weber, who will be interviewed today. Thank you both for taking time to interview this project.
You're welcome.
So let's start. Howard, tell me, where did you grow up?
Here, in Sheepshead Bay.
Sheepshead Bay.
Yeah, my family moved from Borough Park to Sheepshead Bay probably the very end of 1950. And I grew up in the co-ops on Voorhees and Nostrand Avenue.
So you've seen a lot of changes from
Yes.
50s. Can you talk about some of those changes you've seen?
Sure. The major change was that this part of Brooklyn was not built up at all when we moved in. There was literally no shopping on Nostrand Avenue. There were a lot of empty fields, some cows, and my family did shopping on Sheepshead Bay Road, which had stores at that time. Over the years, we watched the stores develop, and I remember getting all excited because the bagel store on Avenue Y in Nostrand was one of the first. That strip was one of the first ones. Then they built the shopping center on Avenue Z, which had as its anchor a store called Cress, which I don't think is here anymore. It was like a small department store. And in that shopping center, they were very distinctive. There was a bakery called Schlucker's, which lasted for quite a while. And you know, a lot of different development. But I remember playing ball in the co-op. Across the street was nothing but weeds, and it was pretty untamed. It built up, once the development started, it built up rather quickly. The co-op that I grew up in is the same co-op as Larry David from Seinfeld grew up in.
Wow, yes.
And my wife always laughs because if you watch Seinfeld carefully, there are references to people that I grew up with.
And places.
And nicknames in Seinfeld. So I can verify all that as, certainly being true.
Okay, so Gail, tell me where you grew up.
Okay, I grew up in East Flatbush in Brooklyn. And yes, I've seen lots and lots of changes. I think the most significant change as I was growing up was the development of the neighborhood Canarsie, because Canarsie was pretty much swamplands when I was growing up. And this was before everyone had air conditioning. My father would take, we were one of three children, so my father would take us to cool off and to have a nice adventure on a hot night. My father would take us, turn the lights off, and go by Flatlands Avenue, which was then more or less swamps. And it was cooler because, it was a swamp area. And he would ride the car quietly through the thrushes, and it would be both scary and thrilling.
Wow, I imagine so. I can't imagine it being swamp.
Yeah, so that was remarkable. Also, my father knew about a farm that was a milk farm, and that was in East New York. I forgot the name of the dairies.
Sunnydale?
No, not Sunnydale. Gosh. It was named after the street it was on, Sheffield Dairies or something like that. And my father used to take us to actually have fun, trying to milk cows and getting unhomogenized milk. Unpasteurized, unhomogenized, right from the cow.
Yeah, back in those days, the areas where I lived and in Canarsie, they were considered the suburbs because they were totally undeveloped. So people moved from the more crowded areas in central and northern Brooklyn down to the southern parts of Brooklyn, which obviously became developed, but not until really, I would say, late 60s.
Oh, that's when they started the development.
Yeah.
I also remember, because I grew up in Flatbush, there used to be a way of transportation which was called the trolley. And on Church Avenue, which was only about 7 or 8 blocks from my house, you still saw the signs of the trolley with the tracks in the street and the overhead wires. I think that I do recall an actual trolley riding down Church Avenue, but I was born in 1949. So I think the demise of the trolley was pretty soon after that.
Yeah, I remember trolleys being on Coney Island Avenue and then on to Brighton Beach Avenue.
Sounds very interesting.
It was. We also used to have a Mardi Gras parade down Ocean Parkway towards the Brighton Beach area that was filled with floats and costumes. It was like a mini New Orleans. That stopped, I think, probably in the early 60s. But for many years it drew a lot of people. And I think the Mermaid Parade currently is kind of a resurgence to try to get the fun back.
Oh, that's good.
I also specifically remember when I was, I guess, junior high, that as a sign of my burgeoning adulthood, my mother would entrust me to go to the movies on Utica Avenue and Church Avenue. It used to be a theater called the Rugby Theater. And we went to the movies, and the admission for the movies in the afternoon was 75 cents, and my mother would give me $1, because with the $1 I got into the movies for 75 cents, and then next door was a pizza store right next to the movies, and 15 cents was a slice of pizza, and a dime was the drink. So for $1 I had pizza or soda and admission to a movie.
There were so many local movies back then.
Yeah.
There was the Sheepshead Bay Theater, there was the Avenue U Theater, there was the Tuxedo Theater on Ocean Parkway, where for 50 cents you could go and see a whole day of cartoons and 2 full-length movies. The Kingsway Theater.
Yes.
There was one on.
I think there was one on Flatbush.
That's
Flatbush,
right.
yeah, well, several, but they all went the way of the multiplexes.
Wow, I can't imagine $1 got you a movie
And
a
have,
dinner.
yeah.
Now you're probably talking, $100 maybe for a family.
I also remember that when I got to high school, there used to be certain in spots for youngsters, for teenagers to go. One of those in spots was the restaurant Jan's, Jahns. Jan's was a family institution. Actually, there even was a branch of Jan's in Sheepshead Bay up until, gee whiz.
It's where Kronos is on the corner of Nostrand and
Where
Z.
the diner was now?
That was Jan's, and they used to offer what they called the kitchen sink, which was ice cream sundae about as big as this table that could feed an entire birthday party of kids.
Right, and it used to be a challenge, like, oh, we're going to get the kitchen sink. And like 5 or 6 friends would, put their spoons in and glop it up. The other thing about Jan's was that if you could bring your birth certificate on your birthday, you would be entitled to a free sundae.
Oh, nice.
Now, in this neighborhood, because I went to Shellbank in Sheepshead, the biggest hangout for kids was right down the block here at the corner of W and Nostrand. There was a restaurant, Martin's, which went out of business maybe 25 years ago. But that corner on a Friday night was wall-to-wall high school and junior high school kids hanging out. It was a lot of fun. We would go in, eat, see our friends, and just hang out there. There was another restaurant that sprung up for the overflow on the corner of V and Nostrand called the Versailles, which was a little bit smaller and not as popular. But kids just roamed Nostrand Avenue back and forth on a Friday and Saturday night. It was safe, and it was a lot of fun.
Also, just as a sign of the difference of time, again, I think I was a high school student then, or perhaps maybe starting college, but I think more so in high school, that friends, girlfriends and myself would go to Flatbush Avenue. Was it the Rialto? The Rialto, which was not far from Jan's. You would make an appearance at Jan's on a Friday night. That was the place to be seen. And then I was a good girl in high school. I didn't smoke, and my parents had never got a gray hair from me. But yet, I, with girlfriends, hitched rides on Flatbush Avenue because that was a good way to meet boys. Mm-hmm. And we never felt unsafe. Never.
Oh, that was great.
Yeah.
Can you tell me who your parents were, Howard, and what were their occupations?
Yeah, my parents, Betty and Phil Weber. My father was a sales manager of the dental laboratory, World War II veteran. He was a medic on D-Day. And my mother was a school secretary at Kingsborough for many years. as I said, we had a rental apartment in Borough Park, and this was moving to the suburbs to have a co-op in undeveloped Sheepshead Bay. The other thing also growing up, and I should add, is that Sheepshead Bay didn't look exactly like it did now. There were many more fishing boats. There were none of the big restaurants except for Lundy's and Tappan's, but that was not on Emmons Avenue. And my friends and I, all summer long, we would meet, take a walk to the bay, spend the day fishing, come back, and it was really much more of a small town, quaint fishing village type of feel in those days.
And what about
my parents? My parents were Paul and Dorothy Gorman. That was my maiden name. And my father was actually born in Poland. But he came here when he was very young. And his reasons for leaving Poland were basically pogroms against Jews. And he came here. And he unfortunately lost his mother when he was an infant. So he was raised by an older sister. He was one of 7 children. So an older sister took in the siblings and raised them. And my father was a serviceman who repaired gas ranges, air conditioners, and he did that for most of his life. In fact, towards the latter part of my father's life, he actually ended up working for Fred Trump. That's Donald's father. And I'm proud to say that when my father passed away, even though he was just a blue-collar worker, he was such a devoted and dedicated worker that Donald Trump's father came to my father's funeral.
Okay, very good.
And my mother was born in America, and my mother was basically a homemaker. We were 3 children, and she didn't work. She did sporadic work in schools, in an office, but nothing consistently. She was basically home with us.
Was it difficult for your father to adjust to a new country and city, or was he too young?
He was too young.
He was too young. So
yeah, he was too young.
Okay, who were your siblings, and can you tell us their names and
Sure.
genders?
I have an older brother and I have an older sister. My brother, Richard, whose last name, of course, is Gorman. My brother, as well as all of us, went to Tilden High School, and he was really, really an incredible student. And my brother had for his, I remember, we're 9 years apart, so, his world was very different than mine, since there's a 9-year age gap. But I remembered my brother working on science experiments in the house in high school. And he won a Westinghouse scholarship, which was a pretty big deal then and is still a pretty big deal now. And I remembered when he took the Regents Scholarship test, he scored the 7th highest score in the state of New York. And in Tilden High School, they had a plaque on the wall for my brother.
Do you know if they still have the plaque?
I haven't been in Tilden in a long time. I wonder.
Yeah, that's nice.
But he was really an outstanding student and went on to get a PhD in aeronautical engineering. My sister, who's 2 years younger than my brother, was not quite the scholar in high school. She was more a social butterfly. But she got married very young, but after having 2 children by the time she was 22 years old, she then decided to go back and get her college degree. And my sister basically got everything short of a PhD in education, except she never wrote a dissertation or did a thesis. And she was an educator all her life in Long Island.
And Howard, what about you?
I have one younger brother, Bennett Weber, who's 6 years younger than I am. Like me, we both went to PS 52. We both went to Shelvane, Sheepshead, Brooklyn College. He then went on and got his master's, and I think a PhD in math. That was his forte. And he's married and lives in New Jersey and has a couple of kids. He does. He's a systems troubleshooter, high-tech world, working for banks. He's the computer genius that I never was.
You know what I'd like to say too, Sharon, is that when I grew up, money was very tight. I could remember exactly the drama when my father brought his pay envelope home on a Friday. And we owned a house. It was a very small house in East Flatbush, extremely small. My brother slept in the basement. My parents slept in the living room just to make it work. And to say that there was no real expendable funds, we didn't We weren't the kind of children who could just walk into any store and buy what we wanted, and my mother used to walk 10 blocks to save a couple of pennies on milk. But my mother kept us busy with such wonderful, wonderful things that were all free. There was no such thing as being bored. My mother would get us all ready. She would take us to the beach by trains. We went from East Flatbush to Brighton by the train, and we had great days on the beach. Didn't cost anything. She packed lunches. My mother would take us to every museum, and she gave us a very enriched life for nothing.
Sounds really wonderful. As you talk about that, can you tell me what role the library played in your life growing up?
Vast. As it was, I became an English teacher. So I don't have to tell you how important reading was to me. And one of the, I still teach, but I no longer teach English. But one of the things that I've always taught in city high schools, I never taught in private schools. And one of the first things I said to my students the first day about supplies, you must come in with a library card. I said, this is what you need to obtain a library card, but until you show me a library card, you're not prepared for this class. And to this day, when I have students who are not members of the public library system, I get crazed and I say, no, absolutely, and they produce library cards.
Well, thank you for being such an advocate. But when you were growing up, did you visit the library like on Saturdays and check
after school? After school, yeah.
And
I used the rugby branch library was my library.
And I remember when this library opened. I don't know the year, but it was a really big deal that we had our own library. And I used to be here all the time as well, enrichment programs and constantly, borrowing books. I have a PhD in English. We met teaching English, although I've been a lawyer for 32 years. But when we moved into the neighborhood and had our daughter, my wife used to take her here. There was a librarian,
Miss Usher, Adrian Usher,
who was incredible. Had
she
the kids
was the children's
around
librarian.
Yeah, a lot of enrichment programs and reading.
She was amazing. I could still hear Adrian's voice singing to the children. She was magical.
Yeah, this particular branch has been a tremendous resource for our kids when they were growing up.
Yeah, because I've heard people say that the library used to be where the YMCA is now, I think a front or something.
There was a little storefront at one point, but we used to walk.
This was the location.
Yeah, but we used to walk to the library in Sheepshead Bay Road until this one opened up.
Wow, very nice. Okay, well, you mentioned that you went to PS 52 and Shellbank. What about you, Gail?
I went to Public School 208. It was on.
Tilden Avenue?
No, it was in East Flatbush, Avenue D. It was on Avenue D and about East 49th Street. And it was a big deal then because PS 208 was one of the few schools, we're talking about early 1950s, that had a real gifted program. I was lucky, I lived in this area. But we had children in my class who traveled from all parts of Brooklyn to be in this school. And the big deal was that, we had advanced learning, but in addition, we had an enriched curriculum. We took typing and we took a language. It was called the IGC, the Intellectually Gifted Children's Program. And I took Spanish. And I also want to mention there was an incredible teacher in Public School 208. Her name was Minnie Rapkin. And again, that feeling of just safety. I hitched rides when I was in high school and never had any fear. Think about how impossible this would be now. Minnie Rapkin was my third grade teacher. No, let me take that back. She was my second grade teacher. When she went to the part that she was teaching us weights and measures, like a cup, a half a cup, and things like that, her procedure would be she would take groups of children back to her house after school. It would take over a course of a few weeks, and we'd bake a cake in her house. So we'd all get a chance to measure out ingredients. And it was customary that the mothers all met at Minnie's house, Minnie Rapkin's house, to pick us up, and we all came home with slices of cake for our moms. Now, could you really imagine a teacher being able to do that today?
No, definitely not.
It was an experience I'll never forget, and she did it year after year. That was her, she was known for that. Then I went to Meyer Levin Junior High School, Junior High 285, and that was on Tilden Avenue. And then from there I crossed the street and went to Tilden High School. And then from there I went to Brooklyn College, and then from there I got my master's at NYU.
Nice. Was there any teacher, Howard, that stuck out in memory? That really made an impact in your life?
From
elementary or Selma?
Elementary, Mrs. Riley stuck out of my head. I was on the history team. We had a competition in those days between high schools. It was like a college bowl for high school students on history, and we had a team of 4 people. We met at the local Veteran of War Hall, and we had it was questions and answers, like a quiz show. And my team won. Mrs. Riley was in charge of that, and it was very inspiring. When I was in Sheepshead, I was a sports editor of the Bay News, which I can remember the name now, but the student newspaper. I was the sports editor and had a teacher and an advisor named Robert Fine, who was an outstanding English teacher and taught me everything I knew about journalism, which I then actually went on to teach later on when I started, as I said before, as an English teacher. And he was outstanding. We were very lucky in that there were a lot of memorable teachers, I think my wife would agree, that inspired us. I remember as early as second grade having competitions with the class about how many books you could read. They'd have charts, with your name on it, and every time you read a book, you'd post the book, give a report, and and it was incredibly motivating to come to the library, pick out something exciting, read it, be able to report on it, go on to the next book, and it worked. It worked. It was great.
I also will add that when I was in 6th grade, I had a Mrs. Rosenblatt, and at that point it was still an elementary school because those were the times when elementary schools went up to 6th grade. And we had a program we used to listen to that came from Brooklyn Technical High School. They have a radio station there. So it was one of these educational channels that children would listen to on the radio. And every Monday we were told to bring in a current events article and write about it, cut it out from the newspaper, summarize it, and be willing and prepared to talk about it. So I guess I had a pretty good record of how I presented my articles. So I was chosen along with another boy in my class, and we went on the radio show, Let's Look at the News, with Irene Schiffer, and we debated topics. So, yeah.
It also occurred to me, if we have 2 daughters, if our daughters were here, they could tell you stories about what the library meant to them, because they were so involved here in their own, supplementing their school in terms of doing special reports, and they were both in gifted programs out of this area.
Yes, we drove them to
Canarsie for the Astor program, which was the premier gifted program in the city at that time, and they lived here several afternoons a week, doing the research. The library was a great resource, and you have to remember that was, pre-computer. So it was the Dewey Decimal System, which they mastered at an early age, and this building was a tremendous resource for them.
I'll also add that I am still a teacher. I started teaching in 1969. I took several years off to have children, but I did go back, and I'm still teaching full-time. I work in a very special program. I used to be a high school English teacher, and then starting about 9 years ago, I started working in a program called Home Instruction. And Home Instruction, as you probably know, being a librarian, is a program where the teachers come to the child because the child is, for whatever reason, too ill or not able psychologically to attend school. Very often, the teachers bring the children to the library. I'm sure you've seen that.
Yes.
Right. Anyway, I want to say that anytime I have a student who could possibly get to a library, I love bringing my students to the library because being in this atmosphere, if there's anything more stimulating than being surrounded by this myriad of books and any resource you need, if we need to look something up, if we need an atlas, if we need a globe, if we need a magazine article, it's here. And, it's just so encouraging towards education that I always suggest, let's go to the library. This is such a stimulating atmosphere for my students.
Yeah, I should also say when I went for my doctorate in English, I attended NYU, But I relied pretty heavily at times on the main Grand Army Plaza library, because the resources were just incredible in those days. Again, pre-computer, they had all the microfiche, and I would go, shopping for specific articles that famous people had written in not-so-famous publications, and it was terrific. It was like my home away from home for about 4 or 5 years.
Could you talk about the people in your neighborhood you grew up with?
Other than Larry David, who went on to tremendous stardom, well, the people, it was a very diversified neighborhood, and not as diversified as it was today. It was heavily Irish, Sheepshead Bay was, when I moved in. There was an Italian section. The Jews who moved in later, as when I did. And there was a mix. There was one section of Sheepshead Bay where there was an African-American section on East 14th by the station, whose families worked in the racetrack industry.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, when there was a racetrack in Sheepshead Bay.
And they have a Baptist church on that block.
Yeah, and that's been there for years. And the families, I think, who live there today are many of them had ancestors that date back to this neighborhood from the 1920s when it was popular. This was a vacation resort at the turn of the century. And most of the people that I grew up with, and I keep in touch with a lot of them, because most of the people I went to public school with locally went with me to Brooklyn College. And so there's a link that there's so many opportunities for reunions, especially now with Facebook and so on and so forth. A lot of them went into the professions, a lot of dentists, a lot of teachers, a lot of doctors and lawyers. Education at Brooklyn College was wonderful. I hear it is again now, which is probably the best value in the United States in terms of getting a quality education for no price. We went with the tuition was free. I was lucky enough to win a Regent Scholarship, so I got $50 per term, which more than covered my books in those days. But, yeah, it was a lot of my childhood was spent, quite frankly, in the schoolyard. When I wasn't in the library, I was in the schoolyard. We played sports nonstop from the time we got out of school till the time my mother's called us up for dinner, and then after dinner until the time we went to sleep. Especially in a co-op, because we had our own play area in the back, and you had 4 buildings that contained a lot of kids. So it was, every mother would stick their head out the window, Supper, Mark, come on up, but just nonstop sports, and we used the fishing of Sheepshead Bay, as I said before.
Let me ask you, when you moved into this area, were the Sheepshead Bay houses across the street, were they already constructed? They
were constructed, and we had a lot of friends who lived in those houses. They were great. A lot of war veterans who came out with very little because they were in the Army, they didn't work. They had the opportunity to move into those houses, which were relatively inexpensive. And, and there were a lot of families. It was very safe and lovely. I remember playing a lot with my friends in what we call the project, but in the Sheepshead Bay houses.
And what about you, Gail?
Well, interestingly, my neighborhood, East Flatbush, I think was a pretty prestigious neighborhood. My parents moved from East New York, which was less prestigious, and then they moved to East Flatbush, and they felt, location. So they bought the smallest house on the block because that's all they could afford, but at least they had a good address. And my neighborhood was very heavily Jewish, many Holocaust survivors. I didn't understand the Holocaust so much then, but I had many friends with parents with numbers on their arms and accents. And only later did I understand really what courage, and my mother and father would talk about it, and some of these parents buried whole families, lost children, lost husbands during the war in camps, and then started brand new families. And if I had known then what I sort of know now in hindsight about what courage they showed to just pick up the pieces of their life and work really hard, it's mind-boggling. And There was also an Irish section. There was not an African American section in my neighborhood. We didn't have any housing there that was African American. By the time I got married, and I lived at home until I got married, by the time I got married, the neighborhood was going through. We got married in 1972. And the neighborhood was going over a change of ethnicity. And there were people from the islands, from Caribbean, who were buying homes. Very lovely people. My parents, who never had one drop of prejudice in them, were quick to adjust to their new neighbors. And my mother, who was a great cook, really reveled in all the recipes she now had part of her repertoire. And they were lovely, lovely people. The neighborhood then started, unfortunately, not to get such lovely, lovely people. And at one point, my mother was the victim of a mugging. And that sort of said their resolve was that they should sell their house. And they did. And they moved into the Beach Haven apartments. They were rentals, because my father worked for Trump.
Yeah.
And Beach Haven was owned by Trump. So.
It's off Ocean Parkway.
And then when I got married, and we had a house here in Sheepshead Bay, my parents bought a co-op apartment on Herring Street to be near us.
So we were lucky because when we had our children, we had both sets of parents living within 2 blocks, and it was great.
Great support system. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. How did your experiences growing up in the neighborhood affect your life?
Oh, may I add something that occurred to me? As my husband was talking about the projects, and you were mentioning the projects, it was my understanding when I was growing up how jealous of my friends, and there were many, whose fathers sort of fit the mold. They were World War II vets. And I wish that I could have lived there, because there were so many kids, and they were able to have friends just down the hall. I lived in a private house. On a rainy day, you were in the house. On a rainy day in the projects, you had everybody running up and down the halls, and you had friends on the first floor, second floor. And I thought that was just the best, and I wished I could have had a situation like that.
Yeah, I think I was very, very lucky in that I had all of these built-in friends. We had outdoor space to play in within the co-op. We were literally a block or 2 from Sheepshead Bay. We had open spaces until development came. But there was a real sense of old Brooklyn, of friends, of being able to travel. I thought nothing at maybe 14 years of age, hopping on a subway with my friend and going up to Yankee Stadium. In those days, you could do all of that, bike riding everywhere, and it was wonderful. Really, it was great. You also had the sense not only that you were kind of in suburbia, but you had all the advantages of Brooklyn. So you were never more than a bus ride or a train ride to take advantage of things like Grand Army Plaza or Ebbets Field or other sites. And it was fun and exciting to see the area develop. I could go block by block and tell you what used to be there and then what changed. The deli down the block, the hardware store here, and so on. And we knew everybody, and everybody knew us, and there was a real sense of community and a real sense of belonging.
But I still feel that. I still feel the sense of community here, because we've been here now 37 years. And one of the things I'm reluctant to give up is the pizza store owner knows us, the butcher knows us.
This is a really convenient place to live.
Yeah.
We tell our friends who say, why don't you move here? Why don't you move there? We always kid around. We say, well, when my wife runs out of cilantro at 2 a.m, we have a choice of the 24-hour Russian supermarket, the 24-hour Israeli deli, the 24-hour Korean greengrocer. Everything you have choices, you have options. It's great. And to be honest, when our kids were growing up, they really benefited by old Brooklyn as well, even though it was several years later. They had a million friends on the block. Kids rode their bikes in the street. Everything was safe. They used the playground. They walked to the library, and it was really terrific.
So would you say the neighborhood has changed for the better or the worse?
Well, it depends from what period this neighborhood went through the same decline, I think, that the city experienced in the 70s, when crime was more rampant and people were fleeing the city because of it. I would say that the neighborhood as it is today is dramatically improved in the last 20 years. Now you can walk on the boardwalk in Brighton Beach in the middle of the week, and it's wall-to-wall people, strolling guitars, cafes on there. I remember in the 70s, you'd have to be nuts to walk on the boardwalk. You get mugged. It was drug deals. It was terrible. So the other thing which we like is how diverse the neighborhood is. As I said before with the stores, the Russian community, the Asian community, the African-American community. Everybody here, shopping together, living together, working together. There's a sense of community, which was missing in the 70s, which was definitely back.
Well, you mentioned Ebbets Field. Did you ever go to Ebbets Field?
I went twice because, A, I'm not a Dodger fan, and I was a Yankee fan, which was very hard for me growing up in Brooklyn, but my father was from the Bronx, so I didn't have a choice. But and the other thing was Ebbets Field was so tiny. I was used to Yankee Stadium, but Ebbets Field was tiny. So it was a team I didn't like and a stadium I didn't like. So I didn't go that often, but I did go twice.
Did you see Jackie Robinson play, or was that before?
No, my first game I saw Duke Snider play. Jackie had retired.
Okay.
Jackie Robinson lived in my neighborhood.
Oh yes,
he lived in East Flatbush, yes. And I know the block he lived on.
Joe Pepitone, who was a Yankee star in the 60s, lived in this neighborhood. I went to school with his cousin Mary Pepitone.
Also, the man who played Tonto,
Jay Silverheels.
Jay Silverheels had a house on Ocean Parkway.
A lot of people came from Brooklyn.
Yes.
So let me ask you, what makes Brooklyn so special? What are some of the things about this neighborhood besides what you mentioned makes this a great place to live?
Well, it's funny. As you grow older, you take advantage of things that in the earlier years you may not have. Like, for example, we use the boardwalk much more now. It's lovely to take a walk at night and whatever. The fact that we can walk to a beach, the fact that we can walk to boats, and we live in Brooklyn. Most people think of Brooklyn as a heavy industrial, kind of a Williamsburg, crushing a lot of people, old factories and stuff. And here we are with boats and beaches and boardwalks and lovely restaurants. We can go to I call this neighborhood the nightclub capital of the world because every storefront is a cafe or a Russian nightclub, and we go to them, and it's fun. There's a lot that you can experience within in a small area. We asked our daughters, how come the hipsters, the young people, haven't discovered Sheepshead Bay yet? And she told us it's not grungy enough. It's not. You're not living in an abandoned factory. You're not working in a converted, mill. It's just, attached houses. But aside from that, it's great. I work in Manhattan. I take the subway. It takes me 40 minutes, and it's safe and it's fine and it's nice. And yet you have the residential suburban, geography of the place. We take our grandson to Coney Island, which is better than ever. I mean, I think it's superb. The new rides and the things that they've done there are really terrific. So there's a real sense that, everyone knows that Brooklyn is hot. This neighborhood is not known to be as hot because young people, haven't moved in. But I think eventually when the space and the demands, run out, I think they'll start to migrate south and they'll start over like we did, in a new neighborhood.
I agree with my husband, and I think that, the tremendous facilities that are in Brooklyn, we have this incredible facility, the Brooklyn Museum, which has First Saturday programs. And it's an incredible melting pot.
I'm going to interrupt for a second. We just had my wife's cousin in from Florida. She was born here, but she hasn't been back in a while. She asked if we could take her on a tour of Brooklyn. This just happened this past weekend. We took her to BAM. We showed her the theater for new audiences. We went by Grand Army Plaza and Prospect Park and downtown. And we took her to the new Brooklyn Bridge Park and Brooklyn Heights. And she was blown away. She said, I can't believe this. This is incredible. And you have all this within in a short space. So, and proximity to Manhattan, it's really incredible place to live.
I think that, as my husband said, things are so much more diverse here. And I'm the kind of person, as everybody knows who knows me, that really welcomes new adventures, new experiences. At one time, I was assigned to work in Bushwick. I didn't know Bushwick from a hole in the wall. And I loved Bushwick when I worked there. I would take exploratory tours during the day because there was such a plethora of different kinds of housing configurations. It's a very Spanish community. And I used to feel that the salsa was pulsing in my body because it was just there so prevalent. So,
I'm going to interrupt. When my daughter was in high school, she had a report to do on Rastafarians. Where else but in Brooklyn? My wife took her, and they went to the Jamaican section and went into restaurants and record shops and bookstores. And
we were welcomed.
Yes.
If you go in with an attitude of, please teach me with respect, and you're treated with respect. And that's true of every culture that resides here. Yeah. I think an overriding feeling on people is, don't threaten my safety. Make me feel safe to be with you. Respect the neighborhood. Don't litter. Don't make us feel that, you're taking poor advantage. And be respectful. If things are different, we have an Arab community that's on
Atlantic Avenue.
And Atlantic is a major, right? And then we have the Arab community that's on Coney Island Avenue near Foster. I've gone in for Arabic tea. Now, I wear a Jewish star prominently displayed, but when you walk in with respect, I think no matter what you are, people enjoy the fact that you want to know something about their culture.
We have a book club, and we read a diversity of books, and what we try to do is we try to meet in a restaurant that relates to the culture of the book.
Oh, nice.
So we read 3 Cups of Tea about Afghanistan, and we ate in an Afghani restaurant on Coney Island Avenue.
The waiters joined into the discussion because it just gave such depth to everything we've done. We went to a Turkish restaurant when we read, the one about the snow.
Yeah, I don't
Well, I forgot the name of the author.
But we matched it up, and we never have to leave Brooklyn. And that's what's amazing. No matter what culture we're reading about or learning about, you can go and experience it and come out a better person. That's something that, you don't really find it much in many other places other than here.
It sounds really, really wonderful. Well, I want to thank you both, Howard and Gail Weber. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Coming down memory lane with you both. And thank you.
You should mention also that we're both extremely young. We just have big memories.
Okay, so I want to thank you once again. This is our project for Our Streets, Our Stories, and we're here at the Kings Bay Library. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Where are you from, Sharon?